I have with me a world-renowned award-winning author, Devika Cariapa. Devika, welcome. You know,
Thank you. Thank you, Devika.
previously an archaeologist, Devika found her calling uncovering stories from stones, making the world of archaeology accessible for children. Her first book, India Through Archaeology, Excavating History, explores Indian history through the lens of archaeology. It was awarded the Hindu Young World Good Books Award in 2018 and the Sahitya Puraskar in 2019. She is also the author of India Through People, 25 Game Changers, and The Adventures of the Kohinoor, an adaptation of William Dalrymple and Anita Anand's book Kohinoor. The book was awarded the Neve Book Award for Distinguished Children's Literature in 2021. Her picture book, Uncle Nehru, Please Send an Elephant, is a vibrant portrayal of India's first Prime Minister who formed a bond with children all over the world through a unique diplomatic initiative. Devika's latest book, A Children's History of India in 100 Objects, which recently received the Times of India Author Award for Children's Writing. So, Devika, this is a very interesting sort of transition from archaeology to writing, So, when did you first realize, that you wanted to become an author?
A very long time ago, I have to say. I was doing my master's in archaeology, training to become an archaeologist. And, archaeology, I have to say it's my love, but it is a very dry subject. And initially we would look at all these tools and bones and, just sort of lumpy stones in the dust and say, this is pretty sort of dry information. And we had these marvelous professors who started training our eye, training our instincts to look at these. And each one of them was telling a story about people who lived 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
There were literally stories emerging from those very dry as dust sort of objects.
Yeah.
And that's when it struck me that these are very interesting observations that children should hear about.
Yeah.
But remains in the realm of academics most of the time, because archaeologists are very busy people who have no time to they're writing journals and they're writing scientific papers and so on. So somewhere at the back of my mind, even then, I thought this would make wonderful information for children, stories. Of course, it took me many, many years after I first had that thought to write my first book, which is, as you mentioned, this one, India Through Archaeology, Excavating History. And it's a fun book because the publishers have done a marvelous job of, putting in pictures and little cartoons and maps and anything else that they find that they thought children would be interested in. It's very sort of quirky and colorful and everything. So,
and it's so nice because, children can really understand things through images as opposed to it just being a dry textbook, which you really have to go through in school, which is why I think they also lose interest because, there's so many ways of teaching one thing. It could either be a very dry, boring way of teaching. The subject, I think, is never boring, right? It's always the method of communication that sometimes is quite dry and people are like, what is this? So what you've done is actually turned in people's eyes a very boring subject into something super interesting and exciting. And it's very important for children to know about this because, it's a history that really defines our present. So tell me, what were some of the objects that you found very interesting writing about? Like your favorite two objects that you were just like, wow, this is something that, children have to know about. And what were they?
Oh, in the 100 Objects book?
Yeah.
It's very hard to choose. I love prehistory because prehistory is my subject.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just a basic stone hand axe, which on the face of it is just a lump of stone. And when you start looking at it, observing it carefully, you see that a human hand has worked on it. The edges are sharp and the bottom is sort of comfortable to hold in your hand. And you think, I say it always, a chill runs down my spine each time I say it. I have a chill now describing that stone, that some man or woman held this almost 1 million years ago and used it to do something useful for themselves. And it tells you a story of how your past was formed. And the
Absolutely.
other objects that I simply love are coins, because
Yeah.
they're so tiny and they literally pack a punch in the amount of information
Yeah.
they give to you. Like, for instance, there's a whole group of people called the Indo-Greeks, the Bactrian Greeks, who
Yeah.
ruled in the very northwestern part, now in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they had such a marvelous impact on northern India, and a relationship that, transcended. Many of them were converting into, can't call it converting, but were interested in Buddhism. A number of them on the early uh, gods that later became Krishna and Vishnu. And they were very, very interesting people, because their entire background
Yeah.
was Greek. They spoke the
Wow.
language, their cities were Greek style, their clothes, everything they did was Greek style,
Yeah.
but they had such an impact. And almost everything we know about them come only from collections of coins that have been excavated.
Yeah.
Nothing else of them remains in their cities.
Wow.
Everything is destroyed. It's just the coins. So those coins tell you so much. And some of the coins are like looking at 2,000-year-old photographs. You see the image of the kings and the queens perfectly minted onto that coin.
Yeah.
And you think,
And
wow,
there were no machines back then, so this is all
none,
handcrafted completely.
handcrafted mint. Yes.
So you
Yeah.
use a very interesting term, prehistory, and just for everyone to understand, what is prehistory? Like, how would you define prehistory?
A time before writing, a
All
time
right.
before written records would be prehistory, as
Understood.
defined by a historian.
Lovely. So, coming back a little bit to your writing, what is your favorite part of being a writer? I mean, from archaeology to writing, surely your life has completely changed. How is it? What do you love the most about this?
Ah, the physical part of writing I love, because I live in a really busy, I have to say slightly noisy household. So
Okay.
I have to wake up really early in the morning,
Yeah.
sometimes at very unearthly hours. And then I just sit in the silence and I open my notebook. I'm very old school. I write with a notebook and a fountain pen and or a pencil. And when I open my notebook, the world is sort of open to me. I could just put anything on that page. So that particularly is my favorite part of being an author. But the other is being able to communicate with children,
Yeah.
the readers. That is amazing, because nothing beats, although authors tend to be very sort of slightly lonely, isolated figures when we're writing,
Yeah.
when we go out into libraries and we go out into bookshops and you meet young children who actually read your work and are inspired by it and are interested in history because of your work, that's a very special feeling.
I know. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, even, I was just telling you, even at Instrucko, the entire idea of us teaching kids is through stories. And it's so different to see. I mean, I probably, when I went to school, we were just taught to sort of pass exams and, just get good grades. Now learning has changed completely. It's more about enhancing your knowledge as opposed to really just taking exams. And it's so much more holistic. Even now with the new education policy coming up, there's so much emphasis on learning through stories, and that's exactly what your work also translates into. Like, it's all learning about the past through stories, through interesting things. And there's this game called I Spy. You're essentially just doing that in your book for children through these objects that you sort of talking about, which are ancient. So it's so interesting to read about and learn about. So coming to this topic, history is probably one of the, I would say, frowned upon topics when it comes to academics in India. Everyone always wants to focus on science, math. You either have to be a science student or a commerce student. And even though I was a history student, everyone was like, why are you a history student? Could you not get into science and commerce? Is that why you were, the last sort of leg where you had to be pushed into history just to get through school? But I genuinely loved history. My parents have always read, have been avid readers. We always had discussions about, things that happened in the past. And, my dad used to love reading and talking about the Mughal Empire and the Ottoman Empire and so on and so forth. So, and I remember talking to my friends in school, and they were always like, uh, history is just something you need to mug up just to pass. And I always found that very hard to relate to. So you now have chosen this topic and given it a very different twist. What do why do you think that people just don't, or schools or educators, etc., not focusing on such an essential, important topic?
I've had exactly the same experience as you described, because initially I was a history student and then I went off into archaeology as my specialization. And it was very much the poor cousin of physics and
Yeah,
math. And,
absolutely.
you were like, oh, aghast, why history? Like,
Yeah,
okay, maybe you can do the
intellect question.
administrative exam, or, you can
Yeah,
join the ISS sort of. There is a fundamental, I would use a sort of a slightly strong term. There's a fundamental, I think, disrespect for history as a
absolutely.
subject,
Yeah,
because there is this notion that, oh, you need to learn math and science and everything. Those are disciplines. But history, you can pick up anytime. I've heard this multiple times, many, many times. It's
yeah,
you read a history book and you become a historian, which is simply not true, because
yeah,
history, as you know,
yeah,
has a rigor. It's a discipline on its own. There's a rigor of study, there's a rigor of understanding.
yeah,
And historians spend a lot of uh, very quality time before they come out with any theories or understandings or notions of history. It's
yeah,
a discipline. But having said that, the way it's taught in school is not necessarily the most imaginative way to capture the imagination of a child. You need the stories you're talking about. So perhaps it would be more prudent to focus on those stories. There are some lovely the new, they're not new anymore, the NCRT books, the older
yeah,
ones, are very well done. They're done by experts. They are peer reviewed across the country and so on. So those were very hopeful. They looked at it in a whole new way.
yeah,
The production was much better. The values were much better. But coming to the point where you asked me why you think children should study history. So there is a saying that I always quote ad nauseum to parents who come to me in despair saying, do something. She wants to study history and we want to,
yeah,
if you don't know where you've come from, then you
yeah,
don't know where you are.
exactly.
And if you don't know where you are, then you don't know where you're going.
Yeah,
It's as simple as that. So if you cannot understand, every one of us is a historical being,
absolutely.
a walking, talking history, everything. We're speaking in English. The reason why we're speaking in English is because of our colonial past, the clothes we wear, the festivals we celebrate, the food we eat. Every one of those has come to us through centuries of decisions and processes that have been taken. And for us to understand ourselves as people, we need to understand those processes, and that is history.
Yeah,
And going forward, even more importantly, when you make a decision for the future, if you don't understand how you are in this situation, how will you take an informed decision?
yeah,
Look at, say, a very broad subject like global warming, for instance.
correct.
Everyone knows what global warming is and we need to deal with it and so on. But a better way would be to understand how it's come about. And
Yeah,
we can go back almost 5,000 years from the time that humans domesticated animals. And that's when the methane gases started getting released into the atmosphere.
yeah,
Or, for instance, a very contemporary situation in say Gaza, Israel.
yeah,
How would you understand what the solution is to that problem if you don't know
yeah,
the history of that situation? So it makes you a better citizen. History makes you
absolutely.
a more grounded a citizen. It makes you able to take better decisions in the future, which is why it's terribly important that
Yeah.
children know and understand history.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because you use this Gaza example, which really is very apt, because in fact, even we have so many parents who talk to us about what they really want their children to learn, and one of the things that they always mention is current affairs. And current affairs is only current today, but is going to be history tomorrow.
History
So
tomorrow.
technically, what they're asking for is current affairs, because it's become a buzzword. Everyone, it's almost like what's trending is what they want to learn about. But this is exactly what history is. So what you're reading about today is something that is going to also tell you about the origin of the problem, which is why we are where we are today. So technically, what they're doing, even by while reading current affairs, is reading history. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
very,
You're informed. You're informed much better if you know what went on in the past for you, to be relevant today.
yeah,
So,
exactly. So, as a writer, we often, like, we teach creative writing, and, there's, and again, like, now there's a lot of awareness around, learning how to write, because usually, I remember when I took my SATs and when I was applying to university, that's when I had to start writing all of a sudden. So for, say, 16, 17 years of my life, I didn't write. And then suddenly, I had to write my SOPs, I had to write essays. And I had no idea, because also no one taught us how to write. It wasn't creative writing, or writing was never a topic in school. It was always English. And English is so wide. It's so broad. There are so many things that come under it, right? So even writing has so many different facets. So there's non-fiction, fiction, and obviously you are a non-fiction writer. What is the difference, you would say, that between fiction and non-fiction, and how different is it really to write either?
I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that you didn't study, they didn't teach you writing, because it was very much part of our English curriculum. There was English literature and language. And in
Yeah,
language, that composition, as they used to call it, was a very vital part. Like the teacher would sort of take your composition or essay apart, piece by piece, and tell you that these are the places where you've gone wrong. This is where the use of language, idiom, metaphor, it was a very detailed kind of an assessment. Perhaps it was the older system of learning. I don't know. Yeah. But coming to your question about the difference between fiction and non-fiction as a author for children, I would say fiction is, you're the master of your words and your imagination, and it can go anywhere.
yeah,
But non-fiction is tons and tons and tons of research. I would say I research and I research and then I research some more in
yeah,
order for me to then find something interesting, a little entry point where I can, for instance, in the 100 Objects book,
yeah.
I would have researched each one of those uh, months at a time. It took me almost 3 years to write the book, because
Wow.
there was so many facets to it.
Yeah,
And then once you put it down, you want to go through, you want experts to read it, you want fact checking, you want to make sure that everything is current in terms of research. So
yeah,
it's a very different ball game altogether, nonfiction.
yeah. And did you go through the writer's block while writing this book? I mean, 3 years is a really long time to be dedicated to doing something. Did you ever go through this?
I have to confess, there were many times when I thought, okay, this is just too ambitious. I should have said a history of India in 25 objects, or
And not
maybe 50,
100.
but not 100. Why did I agree to 100? But yes, writer's block is a real thing. But again, the only way to get over writer's block is to just open that page and just write anything.
Ah, okay.
Anything, just a sentence, even if you're just copying down like the weather report for the day, and then you sort of write until you're in a humor to write, as Jane Austen said famously. I'm not at all in a humor to write, but I must write until I'm in a humor to write,
Yeah,
something to that effect. This is the only way to do it. There is a very, and again I say, we are, as writers, you're very isolated.
yeah,
You're just sitting in there and you're wondering, I'm writing all this, is anyone going to read it? Is it interesting? Is it getting terribly pedantic or dull?
yeah,
In my case, I worry about that all the time, because
yeah,
I don't want children to feel that this is another textbook that they are being forced into reading. Or that is my my lookout every time I'm writing. It's got to be exciting enough for a child to pick up and voluntarily and say, I
yeah.
really enjoyed it. So, yeah.
And I think, one of the things that we've seen these days is that reading habits are really going away because of, all the books are being turned into films, and There's so much, everyone has an iPad, everyone's constantly on their phones. What is your advice for parents who are trying to get their children to read? How do they kind of make that a habit for them?
I One is, this will make me very unpopular, but the parents themselves have to get away from their screens and read,
Right.
because the child is going to do what they see you doing. They're not
Yeah.
going to do what you tell them to do.
Yeah.
They're going to just go by example. So if the parents themselves have, like, parents are busy, very, very busy. It's very understandable if they don't have time. But just a 15-minute or a 20-minute family time, screens down, everybody read. If they're very young children, they read to the young children, which is a
Yeah.
very special process of learning how to read. It's, and quite old children, like even after they learn how to read, they enjoy being read to.
Yeah.
So that, or maybe a favorite book or an epic, or something that they can pick up and carry on as a family tradition, it becomes very special. I think that would be a way to start, perhaps. And there's a lot of very good books available now with Indian kidlit authors. Fantastic books coming out of many, many publishers. Quite unlike when we were young, we had a very limited amount of
Yeah.
uh, primarily foreign authors. We had very few Indian authors and very
Yeah.
few Indian publishers. So we really had to hunt for good books. Now it's the market is. The only thing is you'll have to go right to the back of the bookshop to find those Indian kidlit authors, because they're not always prominently displayed in the
Yeah.
front. But they're there. I assure you, they're all there in the back of the bookshop.
So aside from your books, which other authors do you recommend parents to sort of go and read their books for to their children? Which ones would you recommend?
Oh, there's so many. It depends on the
Some
age
of the
group.
favorites, maybe.
I will mention the publishers. Okay,
Okay.
there's Tulika Books, Daffodil Publications, Pratham, doing a fantastic job in multiple languages, not just in English. It's
Yeah.
all the Indian languages. There's Tara Publications, there's Puffin, of course. Juggernaut has its own sort of way
Yeah.
of, you know, um, so, and there are authors, really talented authors and illustrators. So
Yeah.
what's happening is the illustrators are marvelous,
Yeah.
eye-catching, beautifully designed books. Like, for instance, if I show you my own book, this one,
Yeah.
look at the design of it.
Yeah.
It's
I love
beautiful.
it.
It's something completely.
Yeah.
The illustrator Priyanka Tampi and the designers who've taken so much of time and trouble. These are the new sort of, I would ask parents to go to independent bookstores, or even if they like, I don't know if they have school fairs anymore with these kind of, but where I live in Bangalore, there are many independent bookstores where these are available.
Yeah.
Um, so, or Amazon has tons of the
Yeah.
labels, so they would be able to buy from there. So
Great. I think parents will be very delighted to hear that, because that's the one thing they keep messaging us for, give us some books to read, tell us what to read. So it's actually really good because they want to really put in an effort. And now, with things changing, schools are adapting, creative writing. And in fact, I just gone to a school the other day in Gurgaon, and the library they had was absolutely fabulous. It was so nice to see children sitting and reading these amazing books, like you said, with beautiful illustrations, that just through these images, you're like, going into a world which is completely different. I mean, and there's adventure and there's so much fun in it. It's actually really incredible
and
how.
across genres,
Oh yeah.
there's fiction, there's non-fiction, there are
Yeah.
graphic novels, there are climate oriented green books. That's become a genre in itself
Yeah.
in India. So it's relevant to their situation. They
Yeah.
don't have to hunt for like books from abroad and so on.
Yeah.
Picture books. Uh, I sometimes I come back with a bag full of picture books, and
I
my
love it.
my kids are quite grown up, and they're saying, "So who is this for exactly?" It's for myself, because they're so beautiful. They're
Yeah.
beautifully produced, and complex themes. They're addressing themes that we wouldn't have dreamt of a few years ago, whether it's diversity, neurodiversity, or gender, anything. There's so
Yeah.
many opportunities now for kids to see themselves in those works. Indian children to see themselves.
I mean, yeah, and definitely kids know everything these days. I mean, they know more than their parents when it comes to so many different things, technology. They're always ahead of things. They know what's going on in the world. They're super bright. There's so much information available so easily to consume. But then again, that also becomes a problem because, you need to choose the right information. It can't just be anything, because I think that's one of the things where you really have to decide, okay, these are the things my child should read or should look at and should absorb this information versus the information that needs to be absolutely cut out. So I mean, it's a thin line, but of course, information is always available and there's so much to read. um Another thing, I so there's so many kids who have been writing now, and creative writing has really picked up all over the world. Kids are publishing books. What is one of what advice would you give children who want to become authors?
In the future, authors in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and just generally, to pursue writing from a young age and to become authors in the future.
Okay. So again, one of my favorite authors, Nadine Gordimer, said, reading is the guru of writing. So read fiction, read non-fiction, read
Yeah,
comics, read graphic novels, read anything you can get your hands on in any genre you want. Read the back of your cereal box if it comes to that. Read newspapers, read journals, read magazines if they still exist in your house. And don't restrict yourself to what you think. You'd pick up something that's out of your comfort zone. If you don't
yeah,
like fiction, like I'm always surprised by the number of children who have rejected fiction and then come to reading through non-fiction. Very interesting to me. I always thought non-fiction would be the sort of the
yeah. The one that you
uh,
want to stay away from.
yeah, but there are many children who cannot don't assume that all children read the same way.
Yeah,
They don't.
yeah,
Some children actually like the limited possibility of reading when I say limited, I mean it's limited to a particular, say, a chapter,
yeah.
or they like information coming to them,
Correct.
whereas they can't sustain interest in a story.
Hmm.
Not necessarily when they're reading fiction. They might just put it down and say, okay, this is not really very interesting to me. Whereas they love information. So children read differently, allow them to read across. Secondly, I would say to the young people who aspire to become authors,
Yeah,
spend a lot of time, peel yourself away from your screens and observe the world.
yeah,
Observe interactions between you and your parents, your relatives, your siblings, interactions between people on the street, nature, animals, anything. Observe, because that is a context in which your writing will flower.
yeah,
When you're writing, you need layers and layers and layers. And without a context, if you're glued to your screen, you will never see what the world is all about.
yeah,
Observe. And finally, when you start writing, you need a lot of practice. So you
yeah,
have to write every single day. Even if you write a line, start writing for your school magazine or school blog, or little things where you get feedback, you get maybe a little criticism, you hone your skills
yeah.
the years. And then finally, you'll find a voice. You'll find a very unique voice, which is only yours.
Yours. Yeah.
And that's when you become a good author.
That's really interesting. I mean, and I think it's also so much to do with confidence, of actually now, obviously, there's so many ways of publishing your blogs and writing, whether it's at least give a voice to your thoughts. And really, everyone has that on social media, but to do it constructively is very different. And it's so important to have your own voice, and have your own identity. So I guess, yeah, that can only happen when you practice for years and you really know that, okay, this is my tone and this is what I like talking about. um
I wouldn't rush the process. I would suggest don't rush it, because when you
yeah,
finally find your voice, after all, it sounds like, oh, if you tell a young person you're going to spend years doing this, they're going to say, oh, no, okay, maybe I don't have, there
yeah,
is that
yeah, the
impatience to
patience
put it
is there.
out. Yeah.
Yeah,
But when you find a unique voice, it becomes, it cuts through the
yeah.
clutter of, there's so many publications and so many books, and what makes you unique? I think it's very important to discover that.
But how difficult is it to get your book published? So one thing is, yes, I want to become an author, but maybe people have that fear that, what if I don't do well, or what if I don't become popular? How difficult would it be to publish one's book in India?
It depends on which genre you're in, like, or are you talking about young people or just generally
No,
in?
just generally, just
I think it's not. See, the process has become, thanks to the internet and so
yeah,
on. Like, you don't have to like physically write your book and then post it in the post office as a
yeah,
manuscript, as
yeah,
you would have done not very long ago.
yeah,
So there are submissions pages on every publisher's website. They
yeah,
tell you what they're looking for. They tell you the kind of work that they're looking for. So in that sense, it's quite convenient, and you could. But having said that, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of authors. So
yeah,
you have to be patient with the process. You have to be persistent with the process. You have to
yeah,
keep honing your skills. You have to keep putting it out there for feedback from people you trust or people in
yeah,
the field, or. So
yeah,
it's a painstaking process,
yeah.
very painstaking.
But I think that's like a lot of things, right? I mean, everything that if you want to be brilliant at something, it usually never comes easily. It takes a while. So I guess this is just one of those same things that it, of course, requires patience. And for a child, how difficult or easy is it for them to publish their books?
In my experience, the children that I've met who've had their books published have all been self-published. By the parents have paid, I think, for the books. But there are quite a few younger people. I think Claire Arnie, Samhita Arnie wrote books, and there's a young girl who wrote for Tulika, whose name escapes me. She was 14 when she translated one of the Tamil
Oh, lovely.
thing into English, and uh, she was a homeschooled, quite an unusual young lady.
Yeah.
It was called Parthiban's Dream, I think, if I'm
Ah,
not
okay.
mistaken. Yeah, those are very rare.
Yeah.
But most of the children, young people that I've met, say under the age of 14, who've published, have been self-published.
Okay.
There must be a reason for that. I'm not a publisher or an editor, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to say what the reason is. But the parents have been the drivers
Of
for their children,
okay.
publishing. Yeah.
And coming to a little bit, audiobooks are super popular. What is your take on reading versus listening to a book?
I would highly encourage listening to a book as well.
Okay, that's
You're not looking at images. Listening is like, how children are always fascinated by grandparents telling stories.
yeah,
So that was how I developed my interest in, your grandparents telling you these incredible stories uh, uh, of their lunch or
yeah.
something
Which is
completely.
like a
And
30
this is
minute
what we
story.
eat, and we'd be like, okay, tell us more. So
Yeah,
it's very fascinating. The sound of someone telling you something can be very, very,
nostalgic.
I would say, yes, inspirational for you to start reading. So there used to be, when my kids were young, there were these Tale of Peter Rabbit and so on, and they
Yeah,
would listen to this before going off to school.
they had those
While,
CDs. And I remember
yeah,
having a Peter Rabbit CD.
yes, exactly. And William, just William,
Yeah,
the most very, very funny. They read William as well, but they
yeah,
love to listen to it because it's a form of drama, it's a form of theater. So if the audiobook is done well, I would say it would trigger something in your imagination, and then you
yeah,
start looking at books. But of course, I wouldn't rely entirely on audiobooks
yeah,
because, it's more sort of input into your, rather than when you're reading a book, your imagination sort of spreads out into different worlds.
yeah. So there's you wrote The Adventures of Kohinoor, which is an adaptation of William Dalrymple and Anita Anand's book. And Kohinoor has always been such a topic that everyone wants to talk about because it was our crown jewel, and now it's no longer in India, and there's always debates all over the world around it. And you've written a book on it, right? So tell me more about that, and how what is your take on it,
On the Kohinoor.
on your book? Yeah,
On the
what does your
book.
book talk
Okay,
about?
so it was a very interesting book to write because unlike my other books where I research and then I I find a story. Here, William Dalrymple and Anita Anand have written a book for adults called The
Correct.
Kohinoor. And I was asked, can you adapt it for young children? And I agreed because whenever I find historians or academics have a great body of good research and work, I always feel this needs to be this needs to be something that children know about, which is
Yeah.
the reason I agreed to it. And the Kohinoor in particular interests me because it is such a symbol of our country
Yeah.
in many ways, isn't it? It's a symbol.
Yeah.
And there was so much in that book. There were like bloodthirsty ruffians, and there were like murderers, and there were kings kind of grabbing it from each other, and there were conspiratory queens who sort of grabbed it and then got murdered themselves. And there was so much going on. It was literally like a, a, a sort of,
Drama.
it's called The Adventures of the Kohinoor for a
Yeah.
reason. It
Yeah.
was full of all that. And
We'd
then
love to
this
see
is,
it if it's next to you.
yeah, here it is. This is the one. And then in the midst of it all, there was this tragic little 10-year-old boy, Dalip Singh of Punjab, who had the diamond was his. The rulers of Punjab, it belonged to them finally.
Yes.
And it was taken away from him along with his family. His family was his mother. He was separated from his mother. He was separated from his siblings,
Yeah.
everybody. And he was sent away from Punjab to England. And the symbol of the pathos of his life was that Kohinoor, which was also grabbed away from him. So I thought I start the book with Dalip Singh in the court of Lahore signing something that he doesn't know what he's signing. He's signing away his kingdom. And in the midst of all that, more than the kingdom of Punjab, the British, the East India Company wanted the Kohinoor because
Correct.
it had by then become the symbol of the rule of India.
Yeah.
So why that diamond? Because contrary to what people believe, it was not the biggest diamond in the world.
Yeah.
It was just the most symbolic.
Yeah.
Anybody who had it was a ruler of India. So that's
Yeah.
why they wanted it more than anything to hand over to their Queen Victoria, and who wore it, as a brooch and on a crown and so on and so forth. So that was the story of the Kohinoor, the book, The Adventures of the Kohinoor.
I mean, there's so much talk around it, and and I've seen documentaries on this as well. It's amazing how the whole story actually not many people know about. Everyone does believe that it was the biggest diamond, and they'll always with pride say it needs to come back to India. But it's incredible that you've written a book on it, because I think it's really important for people to know why it's so symbolic and what happened, really, the history again of that diamond, which is why everyone now is talking about the fact that it should come back to India. So amazing. So tell me, what was your favorite book that you wrote? Which one did you enjoy writing the most?
Oh, definitely my first one, India Through Archaeology, because that was all my books. I love them all equally, but they're sitting here. I can't say anything about them.
Children. Yeah.
Yeah, they're listening to me. Undoubtedly, India Through Archaeology, I had the most fun with, because it was years and years of everything that I had sort of just bubbling out onto the pages. And then I met these marvelous publishers, Tulika, who took it and said, okay, we are just going to make, again, that took almost 2.5 years to, not to write so much as to visualize, because there's so much visual element in it. And there were photographs, and there was a illustrator and so on, and the layout of the book, and the fact that it's a hardback book and it's an expensive book in the Indian market. So there was a lot of risk in that. So that process to me was very special, and it won me some very significant and honors that while they humbled me, they also made me feel there is that I need to keep writing. I need to keep writing. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's amazing.
yeah.
No, so thank you very much. I think this has been really interesting, and I hope after listening to you, we have lots of readers picking up a history book, especially yours, because I think that'll truly make them fall in love with history and really understand what it's all about. Archaeology, history, all these books about the Kohinoor, about Nehru. It's just incredible that you've chosen these particular topics, and I'm sure they'll love to read them. So thank you very much. It was lovely to talk to you. And, I'm so excited also talking to you, because I think I'm going to start, I'm going to now order your Kohinoor book and read it myself, even though I've seen the documentary and everything, but I would love to see how it's written from your perspective. So thank you, Devika. It was lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's been great fun talking to a fellow history lover
I
and
mean, you can't
education.
compare me to you for sure. You know,
No,
you
no, no. Of
obviously
course
are.
we can.
I'm
Love of
just an
history
amateur
is
history reader.